Carlos Torras is a partner at FinTech Collective, where he leads investments in emerging markets with a focus on Latin America. He began his career as an FX trader at JP Morgan before becoming chief operating officer of Suyo, a Colombian startup. After earning his MBA from Wharton, he joined FTC and now sits on several Latin American startups boards, including Minka, Symmetric, and Strike AI. In this episode, Carlos discusses building your internal algorithm as an investor, navigating mature versus emerging markets, fintech defensibility, and more. Carlos, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you making the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Yes, I've heard many great things from several people I respect, so I'm excited to kind of get your insights on the ecosystem and emerging markets. But before we get into your path at FinTech Collecto and what you're doing, leading the emerging markets, I'd love to start with a little bit about your background, where you're from. I got wind that both your parents are Spanish and Brazilian, and how that impact on your cultural has had for you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my parents are, my father was born in Brazil to a Spanish father and a Lebanese mother. My mom was born and raised in Spain to Spanish parents. So how it impacted, yeah, I think the way it most directly impacted my upbringing is probably the fact that because of my dad's upbringing, right, we moved to Brazil as a family for his work when I was 8 years old, right? So from an early age, I was raised abroad, and also I had to, more specifically, I lived in Latin America, right? I started learning Portuguese, and it started, I think, it started definitely a stretch of time that I spent in Latin America, right? In total, I've lived there for more than 10 years of my life, and now obviously it's the region where I focus a lot of my professional attention, the vast majority of it. So definitely it was relevant for that.
Coming from, I guess you'd say like bicultural backgrounds, linguistically, it's one part. Was there other aspects that were a challenge to find as an identity without getting too into that? But just curious.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always had a foot in different places, right? In part I'm European, in part I'm Latin American passport wise, and I guess I am a permanent resident in the US, so I'm at the very least Americanized, right? So I think
Yeah.
I've always had a bit of each, and I like to think that obviously you can always learn the best of the different places in which you are, and I think that shapes you as a more well-rounded person, right? So I would say that.
Yeah. Gotcha. And then going into like kind of your childhood and so forth, was there any like hobbies or things you excelled at? I think it's interesting to hear people that have reached levels of success that people aspire to. Was there something in sports, math that you did well at?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, sports definitely became a passion. I think by virtue of how much I moved around, I didn't dedicate myself to any particular sport from an early age. I kind of moved around. Did focus on water polo from age 15 onwards. So I wouldn't say I excelled. My cousins were professional players, so they definitely, by no means did I reach their level, not even close.
Yeah.
But I did play. I was fortunate enough to win a high school state championship. I played in college, and even I had the pleasure of playing my first year here in New York when I was already working full time. I played at NIAC, which is a team with former Olympians, and although it was obviously recreational, it was incredible, right? So I think
Wow.
sports have always been very motivating for me.
Yeah. I actually played water polo for one season, my freshman year,
Nice.
because I played baseball. Wow. They're like, oh, you'll be fine. I was gassed. I couldn't, the warm up, I was done. Everybody else is swimmers. I was
Yeah,
literally a fish in water, but not
yeah,
doing much.
yeah.
Gotcha. So moving on, I had asked this as I was researching a little bit about you. Coming from such a diverse background, I came across that you actually speak 5 languages. Most of these languages you learn as a kid, and did you develop some as you grew older in your professional career?
I did mostly, yeah. You're giving too much credit. I mean, keep in mind, you know, I was raised speaking Catalan and Spanish at home because those are the languages my parents spoke to me growing up. I moved to Brazil when I was 8, right? So I started learning Portuguese, and I do have family in Brazil, so I had to communicate with them. And I went to an American school from age onwards, right? So I had to learn English, right? And I think that was a good time investment. So there you have that's 4 of the 5, and then French I picked up later. I mean, my French is definitely much more rusty these days, but I did, I think, knowing all the other languages, it made it easier. And that's the one I did study, right? But it makes a difference, I mean, when you're not living in the place where they speak the language fluently, it's just a lot harder to achieve masteries.
Yeah, and I guess as you moved around, you were forced to at a young age, like speak to people and learn the language,
Exactly.
or you wouldn't have friends.
Exactly. That's the best forcing function to learn a language. Yeah, there's nothing better.
Yeah, for sure. Getting into your college years, you decided to go to school in the US at Penn, and then you moved into JP Morgan as a trader. Do you want to talk about, was this your vision of when you graduate, hey, I want to go work in New York? Or was this more by default, like most people say?
No, look, my my decision to go to JP Morgan, I think, was informed by, and more specifically to trade currency options, was informed by my fascination for the markets. And I think especially the socioeconomic forces, levers that sort of move markets, right? And a currency at the end of the day is a manifestation of that, right? So
Hmm.
that motivated me. I mean, the idea of trading derivatives was intellectually stimulating, right? From a mathematical point of view. So that informed that. The irony of the situation is the fact that looking back, I covered every currency except the Latin American currencies because they had their own desk
Oh
that
my.
did options, forwards, and other things. So when you look at today, it's like today basically almost all I do is Latin America focus. So it's kind of
Yeah,
funny, right? But
that's so ironic.
it is, it is. But look, I think for me it was an incredible starting point. I think I learned to manage levels of stress that I never thought were possible, even having done sports, because I mean it just required very quick thinking
Hmm.
and very quick reactions and doing and processing many things at the same time. But but yeah, it was fascinating. I think, I did learn there that the lifestyle that entailed was also not for me, right? So that's
Yeah.
what prompted me to make a decision quickly in terms of, this is not the path that I want to go down. So after a year, I made the decision of leaving without having a next job lined up yet. I took some time to think, and that's what landed me in, a couple of steps
Yeah.
later, it landed me in Colombia with Suyo, which obviously was a very, very different thing. But I
Yeah.
returned to LATAM.
And Suyo, and please jump in if I'm misunderstanding the concept or the vision, was basically empowering low-income families to have better access to property rights and title. And at first, it seems like this could be something that's not for profit, but it is venture-backed and for profit, correct?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, Suyo fundamentally, exactly. We create a platform that allowed property formalization, and it streamlined the process, especially as you say for low-income families, which is where most property informality lies, right? And there's
Yeah.
many degrees and different shapes of property informality. I won't get into it because that will
Yeah.
require the rest of our time. But certainly it is a very obscure process that includes many different types of players. Like you have engineers, you have architects, you have those making the appraisal. Like all these people have to play a certain role
Hmm.
and lawyers, of course, right? In following processes that are extremely Byzantine and difficult, and that's hard to do for people with
Yeah.
advanced education. It's very hard for others. So we try to streamline that into a process. And obviously it was a B2B2C sales motion. We would basically offer it as an employee benefit to certain corporations and companies. And it was fascinating. I think as a business model, definitely tricky, but as you say, I mean, the objective was definitely to have a social enterprise that was for profit. And I think to a great degree it was achieved, and the lives of thousands of people were improved. So I'm very proud of the work we did there and the people that I worked with.
Yeah, and just to kind of come full circle on that, was it very receptive by the end user, or was there like friction, like this doesn't seem right, this could be scam?
No, I think it was well received, especially after we went through employers, right? Because I think that sort of,
Hmm.
you're right, like doing it B2C directly is a very hard thing to do. But what was difficult was creating the sense of urgency, right? For people that have spent decades living in informality
Yeah.
and have much more competing needs for their income. I think, having people visualize the fact that this is something that you need and the benefits of this you will see in decades to come was, the sale was much easier to people that were already in their 50s, 60s, because I think they had more
Yeah.
perspective. But when you were speaking to people, starting in their 20s and 30s, it was much harder, right? Because they just,
Hmm.
they saw other uses for that money. And it's very fair. So I think that was quite difficult as part of the sales process.
And this was your entry point into, you could say, the Latin America tech ecosystem. Was this the seed that eventually you said, hey, I want to come full circle later on? Or did you always know before this is what you want to do?
Yeah, so what I would say is yeah, exactly. So when I was at Suyo, I discovered the venture world, right? Obviously, I
Yeah.
had a contact, especially with an entity like the Meteor Network. At that time, Peter Rabley led the initiative. We're still in
Hmm.
touch. They do fantastic work since then. The Meteor Network, for example, out of the Meteor Network spun Flourish, which is one of the best, impact focused fintech
Hmm.
investors out there, I would say, and we still have and we have a great relationship with them. But it put me in touch with that, and I think it also put me by trying to find financing options for our customers. I started to
Hmm.
see the ecosystem of digital wallets that was beginning to proliferate in Colombia, and that going back to my finance roots at Penn, the idea of fintech and the concept of fintech really began to become much more interesting to me. And
Hmm.
of course, after that, I came back to the US to pursue my grad school between Wharton and the Harvard Kennedy School, and that's where I started with Wharton, right? Fintech at Wharton, not surprisingly, given the finance focus is a big thing, and that was part of what got me to FinTech Collective, which of course I can tell you more about.
Yeah, and we can get into that, but the question I was gonna ask before that was, at this moment in time, was this a opportunity that you started to say, "Okay, I wanna pursue this MBA at Wharton, and I know I wanna be in venture?" Or was it still unsure where this was gonna lead me? Because most people say,
Yeah,
"I went to the MBA for X."
no, I honestly, when I went to business school, I thought I was going to be an operator. I very much enjoyed my work as a COO at
Yeah.
Suyo.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think at heart I'm an operator still today. I
Yeah.
always tell people, right? I think I'm an operator masquerading as an investor, but that's exactly I think that's what most of us at FinTech Collective do, and I think that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely thought that was going to be the case. What happened is that since I did a 3-year program, and it didn't end up being 3 years because of COVID, but anyway, that was the framing. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I was like, my first summer, I have a whole summer to experiment. I was like, I don't have to be as focused on doing an internship in a job that I want to then get full time. So that opened my mind to the idea of venture. I was always venture capital and private equity are big things at business schools, right? So I was like, okay, like maybe I should consider the other side of the table. I did get along with the VCs that backed Suyo. I did find their work interesting. So let's give it a try. And I think,
Yeah.
I was very lucky to find the opportunity at FinTech Collective because there was a confluence of factors that I think led to the work that I've been able to do really now looking back over the last 5 years. And I think it was very opportune timing in many ways.
Yeah, and at Wharton, this is kind of where the inception of your relationship with Gareth and Brooks, the managing partners, came in. And did the role evolve organically? Basically, you went to the internship and an
Yeah.
opportunity opened up?
Yeah, exactly. So I did I did the summer associate, program here at FTC in the summer of 2019. But, by the way, highly recommended 21. I think no, really, we still do it today religiously because it's a great feeder for talent. And I think and honestly, it's a great experience. So anyway, so,
Mhm.
so I did that. And then through that, I started working with Gareth and Brooks. From the beginning, they've always given me a lot of autonomy. And even that summer, they told me basically like, look, we're gonna equip you with some business cards. We're gonna teach you the FinTech Collective, intro speech, and we want you to go to Latin America and come back and report to us, basically.
Yeah,
And
go
I
find
remember
talent.
yeah, Gareth said that the first week, and I remember like we had lunch, and in the afternoon, I sort of like shyly go to him, and I'm like, Gareth, like did you mean when you say go there? Did you mean like literally like buy plane tickets and go there? And he's like, of course. What else would I mean? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe Zoom. And he's like, no, 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 you're going. And I went for 3 weeks, and honestly, that trip was incredible because of the FinTech Collective brand and the fact that we had already started making some investments in the region, and of course, we had a portfolio here in the U.S. that was gaining that was gaining recognition. A lot of doors opened for me, so I use that as a massive networking exercise to basically meet anyone that I
Yeah.
could in the venture scene. I think I had like 10 meetings every day for like 3 weeks, and
Wow.
maybe
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating, but I was
5
really
or
like,
plus. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely more than five. And it's funny because even looking back today, that started relationships that today have led to several deals that I have done. So that
Mhm.
trip was a game changer, and I'm super
Yeah.
thankful to Brooks and Gareth for opening that door for me because they didn't have to do that, right? They could have just had me here in New York, doing analysis or due diligence, and they sort of gave me the chance.
And that time you said FinTech Collective had some exposure, some investments in the portfolio, but there wasn't truly a lead partner or associate or principal in emerging market Latin America at the time?
No, there wasn't. As I say, the founding father of FTC LATAM was Sean Lepel, who's a partner here and a good friend of mine. And Sean was doing at that time he was doing all fintech all lending deals. He was doing LATAM and then he was doing digital assets. Since then, he's gone on to lead two of our DeFi funds. And he
Nice.
really he's a very known name, I think, in the DeFi world. He's also an
Hmm.
amazing guy. But he's the founding father of of FTC LATAM, and through him and another principal at the time, Matt Levinson, yeah, exactly. There were a couple investments that were done. I think by the time I got here, if my memory serves me right, there had been two deals already, smaller checks. And I actually got a chance to work on two the summer I was here. So that was
Nice.
great. But we were not leading deals in the region yet.
Gotcha. So just following on as a co-investor. So that kind of leads right into the FinTech Collective thesis. And when I was researching the thesis at the time, Gareth and Brooks said basically rewiring the way money moves through the world, which I thought was very interesting at that time. How has it evolved over time, and how do you guys do such a good job covering the globe and also covering everything in fintech?
Thank you. We do what we can. But so yeah, look, I think fundamentally the thesis remains the same. I think nowadays, right, the way to think about it is we're really investing in the intersection between financial services and AI, right?
Mhm.
Because AI obviously is a paradigm shift, right? And what's happening there is allowing the redefinition of many verticals and sub verticals across financial services, right? But what's beautiful about fintech, financial technology, is that it allows us to play in many different categories with business models that are very different in different parts of the world, right? Like, for example, when you look at a payments company, it has nothing to do with an asset management company, which is very
Mhm.
different to a lending company, right? So I think that in that sense, right, the categories that we look at remain relevant, but we are looking for the next generations of models in that, and we're always open to different types of categories as well. Like for example, we're always pushing the thesis, which I think is very healthy and it's very necessary. Like I just yesterday we announced our Series A investment as a lead in Strike, which is a Uruguayan cybersecurity company, right? Like Strike, I mean, the way I see Strike as a foundational infrastructure provider for financial services entities in the region and beyond, because today they have clients beyond LATAM. In the US, they've had interesting traction. But I see Strike as an infrastructure provider, right? The same way that I see Symmetric as a fundamental infrastructure provider in a different category, right? When we talk about the back end financial operations of some of these entities, right? And I think in a world that is very rapidly digitizing, especially in LATAM. And I've seen that transformation in the last 5 years because COVID was, of course, a massive accelerant to that
Yeah.
effect. This is these type of solutions are very necessary. So,
Mhm.
one has to continuously push the thesis. One has to understand where things are going, where they can go. You can't get stale, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't advance.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to this kind of broad range in the financial stack, as some would say. But you guys have offices basically around the globe. How do you see different cycles in fintech and mature markets? Do they help you identify opportunities in emerging markets, or is that maybe a misconception?
It's a good question. I think, yeah, look, we have an office in New York and an office in London. I think undoubtedly the work that we have seen or the evolution of fintech that we have seen, especially in the US and Europe. Really, if you think about Brooks and Gareth and their track records and their careers, they've been in fintech for 25 years since they met creating Moltex in 1999. They'll get mad if I'm dating them, but I'm saying that they have a lot of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so yeah, I mean, look, I mean, obviously that gives us very good perspective in understanding certain trends. I think
Mhm.
that you cannot just look at developed markets. Like when I look at LATAM, the market of reference for me that is most relevant is actually India, which is a
Mm.
place where we don't yet invest, but I have spent time and energy looking at, and I have good connectivity because I think it's probably the best point of reference. And even I think looking at the ecosystem in China is interesting. Obviously, structurally very different to LATAM, but there are interesting parallels in a country that developed extremely fast. And obviously, the wealth creation in the middle class was rampant. Latin America is not exactly doing that, but there are interesting parallels, and we've taken time to look at that as well. Like
Yeah.
we co-wrote a piece with Polymath on
Mm.
payments, parallel payments between the LATAM and China. I think that was in the summer of 23.
Mhm.
So anyway, so we've looked at that as well.
I think it was a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks. Arjun Sethi from Tribe was making the same parallels, how he compares India with LATAM, but he still thinks LATAM might be a little bit behind, but he thinks there's a lot of parallels in the demographics.
I think there are. I think there are
Yeah.
certainly, and not only the demographics, but also India stack, and
Mhm.
especially the UPI, the real-time payment rails, and the
Mhm.
infrastructure built around that is not only a global reference point, but of course a point of reference, especially for a market like Brazil or even Mexico, where the realities are relatively similar and the socioeconomic structures and are quite similar, right?
Mhm.
So I definitely think, I think especially in Brazil, you see a lot of comparisons because of the creation of peaks.
Yeah. We'll get into what you guys did with the payment rails in Colombia. But before we get into that, a broad question, and I think you'll have an interesting answer is how do you think of defensibility in fintech, especially when it comes to like distribution advantages, regulatory environments, incumbents? Do you have any thoughts?
Of course. Yeah, I think it depends on the model. Look, in fintech, I think regulation is a very important thing, right? I think you sometimes, especially in emerging markets, like having certain licenses is vital for the functioning of a certain model. And the time it might take you to secure a certain license, this is especially relevant in Mexico, can be a make or break. So I think that that's definitely important. When we think about defensibility as well, we can think about go to market, quite frankly, because I think I always say, right, like having unfair, and by unfair, I don't mean illegal, unfair meaning advantageous distribution advantages, it makes a big difference. And in markets where you have massive conglomerates, right, and the concentration of GDP in certain economic groups is quite concentrated, right? Like I think it becomes very relevant to be able to develop those relationships, exclusivity agreements, or relationships more informally, right? And I think that that's
Hmm.
something we, for example, in Matilda's case, right, like their
Yeah.
agreement, their exclusivity agreement with Santillana across Spanish-speaking LATAM, that's a game changer, right? And I think these type of things also create defensibility. So those are two thoughts on how to think about defensibility for these
Yeah.
models.
Thanks for that. And before we get into the portfolio and talk about a couple of the companies, and actually I mentioned Strike in the question, how do you guys think of portfolio construction? I know FinTech Collective is now over almost a decade and a half. How do you guys think about how you guys deploy capital, follow on approach, and so forth?
Yeah. So for us, portfolio construction is very, we're very thoughtful about it in the sense that we'd rather have a concentrated portfolio. We'll make 15 to 20 core bets per fund. And we typically like to lead or co-lead deals, have significant ownership post-investment, ideally do a price round, structure a board, and be very close to the investments, be able to reserve capital for follow-ons. And we have an opportunity fund now. So if the company performs well, we
Hmm.
can then incorporate it into our opportunity fund, like we have done for Symmetric or Matilda, to give a couple examples, right? So we very much are part of the school of thought, for lack of better words, of just doing less bets and really
Hmm.
doubling down on them. Like that's how we like to invest. And that's why before, when I was joking about the fact that we're operators at heart, like, no, it's true. That's how we like to do things. We like to be able to spend time with our founders, be able to help them on several things and spend just hours working on them and iterating on ideas. Like that's really, I think, what wakes us up in the morning and gets us excited.
Yeah. And I saw also you really want to be the first institutional investor to lead the round. How do you gain conviction? You mentioned picking up and like really being hands on, and you can do that when you're only making 15 bets a year or investments. How do you gain conviction so early when someone comes to you with an idea and they're saying, I want to raise my first institutional check?
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, the most important thing is the founder and the founding team,
Yeah.
right? I think that after doing this for years, like I think you develop certain ways of evaluating the potential of people and trying to get it. I mean, obviously, this is much more an art than a science, and sometimes we're wrong. But I do think, as Brooks likes to say, that you develop your internal algorithm, right? And I think after several reps of talking to founders, you start noticing subtleties, right? So
Yeah.
that's one thing, right? Studying that, obviously, as as we build our network, and especially in a region like LATAM, where the the tech ecosystem is relatively concentrated. You can reference people with greater ease, right? You can basically see,
Mhm.
okay, who worked with this person, who would know them, who was on the other side of a deal with this person, and get a sense, right? So I think that is the most important part of our work in that sense. And then, of course, you have the more conventional due diligence aspects.
Yeah. And you mentioned this really understanding the founder. Is there some things that you've seen the last 6 years, I think now as a partner leading the LATAM initiative, that are like key to really understanding this person has a chance to build a generational company?
Yeah. So I like to say that I think that, look, building a VC-backed company is probably like the most masochistic exercise someone could do. And I mean it. It's not really is not for everybody, because I always say it's a trade-off, right? Like you're giving significant ownership of your company for the chance of growing faster and accelerating an outcome, right? So I think some founders just fundamentally don't understand that compromise, right? And I think the personal sacrifices that you have to be willing to do in terms of the time requirement, the stress level.
Yeah.
There's one aspect of that, which is like the effort, focus, stamina,
Hmm.
but then there's more. And I think
Yeah.
that few people can reconcile this with the second part that I'll not describe, which is more the creativity and quite honestly, like two things: the willingness to constantly question what you're doing in a way that is not distracting. But the best founders that I've seen, for example, Alejo and Santiago at Symmetric, sorry, do this very well, and I've seen it many times. Like you have to be willing to steer the ship in a different direction or make decisions that end up being consequential when they compound into other developments in the future at any given moment. All of us, and especially a founder, wakes up in the morning every day and you have a to-do list of like 200 things. So the fact being able to suspend reality like that and make these decisions is a very, very hard thing to do, especially for people that I think are very driven and focused, because sometimes you can, you put your blinders on, you're executing, and you can close your eyes to that. I think that's a problem. And that leads me to the last point, which is you have to enjoy that. Like, I think a founder that is able to thrive in this chaos, that enjoys it, that derives energy from this, and really has a good time, somehow undergoing massive stress. Like, well, there's very few people that can do it, but some people can. And I think when I met Santi at Strike, like, I was like, wow, it's like this guy, you put him in the fire, and he goes with a smile, and he loves the challenge, right? And no matter what he's facing, I think he's going to be able to find a way forward. And like, that's, that conditioned, that condition pushing our thesis into cybersecurity, right? So there you have it. I think
There you go.
I know that was a long answer, but I think it's like the combination of all these
No.
things that make a venture backable founder. And finding this is very hard, and identifying these traits in someone when you don't know them before is also very hard. So, it is
Yeah,
what it is.
I think you mentioned a hint at it with the founding team. Have you seen this? And I wanted to hear your opinion on this, where you like the founding team, but the weak point or the place where you have the least conviction is the CEO. Is that really hard to then move forward because they are the steering the ship, or is that maybe
Yeah.
not as much as a problem?
I've never been asked this question before. It's a
That's
very good
good for
one.
me. I like that then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Look, wow. Okay, so I would say the title of CEO can change. So I think the immediate answer would be yes, that would be a concern, because I think ultimately the CEO has to make very important decisions, right? So if you don't see the person being able to do that, then that's an issue.
Mhm.
So, for example, sometimes when we see co-CEOs, by the way, there are companies that have it, some of which we've backed that I think are performing very well. But typically, that's a bit of a yellow flag, because we've seen a lot of that not work, because oftentimes one person needs to have the ultimate leadership at the end of the day.
Right.
But that leads you to the fact that, look, I mean, I think the leader of a company at a certain moment doesn't have to be the leader of that company going forward. And I think that sometimes, if the CEO has certain weaknesses at that moment but can contribute value down the line, then I think I would be willing to consider having that person in the founding team, because maybe that person is better suited for a next iteration of the company. Because the company,
Mhm.
as these companies grow, it's kind of like babies, right? Like, they just change constantly as months go, and the needs are different, and it's just a
Mhm.
very rapid cycle. So that's how I would answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, and the last kind of few questions on just founder profiles, and you probably met with thousands of founders now. What are some non-obvious signals that the common and maybe angel investor or operator doesn't understand that you pick up on as you look for founders and potentially invest in them?
So, less common signals. I would say, look, I think that the way that some founders answer questions during a pitch, call it, is very telling. I think that after looking at so many founders and sort of building the internal algorithm that I was telling you, like, you can sense when people, I think, are getting defensive, um, when they are more intellectually open to a challenge,
Mhm.
and when they're sort of, or when they're giving you an answer that is scripted, or that is just safe because that's what they know how to say, right?
Mhm. Or
So I would
complete BS.
exactly. Yeah. But one thing I would say is that, look, at the end of the day, I think the best founders, they have to be willing to incorporate feedback and take challenges, but usually they walk away with the plan that they came in with, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, there's a certain level of stubbornness and self-belief that they need to have. So I think finding that balance is very hard. And sometimes when you're doing a pitch, like, after so many of these, you start seeing some characteristics where you can tell if the person, it's very hard to gauge, and one can be totally wrong. But
Mhm.
sometimes you're like, okay,
Mhm.
if this person's already getting defensive when I'm pushing a little bit in one of the first questions, like one of the first conversations, I can't imagine what this will bode like if the company's having problems later, right? Like, this is probably not someone that is very open to change, or someone that is going to be able to at least incorporate feedback and have honest
Mhm.
conversations.
Yeah. So would you say if you had to pick one trait, what would it be that's the
For a
most
fun
important thing for a founder?
perseverance.
Perseverance.
Yeah, above all. I
Bubble.
think. Yeah, because you can be smart, you can be creative, you can be flexible, but you will have to endure. It's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very,
Yeah.
very hard, and it takes a while.
Yeah. Now it's moving into the portfolio of FinTech Collective, and specifically in LATAM. You do sit on quite a few board seats, to name a few: Minka, Symmetric, Strike AI, which I'm so happy I saw before we talked, among others. So I wanted to dive in a few of them, ask some questions, get an idea of what you were looking at and how you gain conviction.
Yeah.
First, dive into Minka, and from my understanding, there basically was an integral part of building the payment rails in Colombia for Transfia, and now it's become a part of basically regulation as well. Is that true?
Yeah, so look, Minka is fundamentally a very technical company. One of the most technical companies that we've invested in, and one of the most technical founders that I've worked with. And I've had the pleasure of working with Dom since the summer since my summer associate days that I told you about, right? So we've known each other for almost 6 years already. Yeah, you're right. Minka was really ahead of its time. Like they
Yeah.
as you say, they provide the underlying infrastructure for real-time payments, and they provide that, right? Like fundamentally. And they've been able to power, as you say, Transfia, which is the peer-to-peer real-time payment system set up by the ACH of Colombia. Now there's several changes in that in Colombia that are undergoing, and we won't get into the details of that. Yes, but Minca's technology has proven to be useful and to power systems that clearly are moving in the direction of the future, right? So we are very excited, as you say, to see Minca continue to power real-time payments in Colombia, but also expand to different geographies. And the company definitely is pursuing several projects that will lead it in that direction.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
it's a very interesting company.
when you reflect back on those early days, because you've been working with them for a while, why were they so able to balance this regulatory policy standpoint, but product side, but working with them? Because it's really hard to do that, right? Especially in an emerging market and especially in Colombia.
Yeah, I think Dom is an extremely patient person, and I think that but when you mix this technical knowledge, because he's someone that understands the details incredibly well and is very close to product and tech, as well as the fact that he's very patient and he's a Croatian guy that became fluent in
Yeah.
Spanish and settled in
Wow.
Colombia, like he was able to truly exactly have conversations at a government level that are that are long and require a lot of patience and iteration. But I think the mixture of these two things allowed him to succeed and to really unlock the transfer opportunity.
Yeah, and I recently saw like last year they were potentially now expanding into Africa, and you mentioned India, so they're looking to basically build a global company.
They are, yes, they are. I think
Yeah.
very much still focused on LATAM, but yeah, their ambition is global.
Okay. Moving on to, Symmetric, and you guys led their Series A in 22, and then you also, I think, they raised a Series B in 24. I think you participated.
Mhm.
You referenced them earlier. What did you see, and what did you gain so much conviction on those two founders, the founding team?
Yeah, look, I think for me, beyond Alejo and Santi, as I call them, right? Like I remember there was an afternoon that I camped out in their office in Bogota in October of 2021, and I met all the heads of the different areas, the ones that were there, because a few of them were in Buenos Aires. They have a team in Buenos Aires as well. The alignment in vision and sort of coherence in objectives and mentality that I saw in that group of people, I thought was special. I was like, the symmetric product is very hard to explain. And I think, and at that time, they were going from version one to version two. Yeah. And so, there were a lot of things that were not givens, but I was like, wow, these people have created a group of very talented individuals that are extremely committed to this company, to what it's building, and have massive clarity and thought. And really, they all say something that is very consistent one with the other, right?
Mhm.
Without even being a Series A company, they already had a head of people. From the beginning, they brought a person called Andres, who's great, and he was fully focused on building the talent and the culture of being the guardian of the culture of the company, and making sure that that they laid out the foundations in which they would subsequently build. And I think that is crucial. I mean, that's something that even today, honestly, Symmetric truly is special in that regard. I don't know how they do it. They're now a decentralized company, but even today, the talent retention they have is phenomenal. The sense of commitment that they have is just extraordinary. They have these fests, as they call them, every year, where they now bring the whole company to Colombia. Yeah, it's like a cult. Like I say it in a very positive way, but it's wild. Oh yeah, these people are like completely obsessed with Symmetric. It's the sense of
Yeah.
mission is just it's extraordinary for a company that is basically building financial operations automation, right? Which is not exactly
Yeah.
the
No,
sexiest topic.
I was going to ask that. It's now across 35 countries, and at a high level, without getting too into the technical terms, it's basically financial integrity as a service, and they work across fintech, embedded payments, and marketplaces. So like work with like a Mercado Libre and also a new bank, and basically they're allowing them to reconcile transactions through cross border. Correct?
Well, what they're doing what they're doing is they've created a tool fundamentally what it does is financial reconciliation for payments, right? So for companies that have a high degree of pay and payout transactions, they're able to reconcile the payments. And at a broader level, what they're creating is a suite of products that will allow the automation of the financial operations of such companies, right? So yeah, I mean they're fundamentally a B2B software company selling into the financial enterprise as well as other type of companies like
Hmm.
marketplaces, retailers, payments
Yeah.
companies, etc.
And they've been global from the beginning. You mentioned they're like a decentralized team, and the team's, I don't know how big, but I assume
Mhm,
quite big.
mhm.
Do you, from their perspective, it's clear they thought globally from the beginning. Do you find that a lot of LATAM or founders building LATAM don't think globally enough and they think too regionally, or is it really case to case?
Well, not every company can be global, right? Like it's difficult. Like for example, certain companies you mentioned we talked about regulation before. Certain companies are very tied to the idiosyncrasies of the geography
Hmm.
in which they operate. But Symmetric, being a B2B SaaS and a company that thankfully earns its revenue in dollars, I think that definitely helped. And what made, by the way, what took Symmetric global from the start is the fact that they had customers from LATAM that started operating beyond LATAM, right? So when you think about companies like PayU or more relevantly dLocal or eBanks, like those guys just took them with them, right? And then from there they were like, wait a second, actually we see this market need in other geographies. So we see this market need, in other emerging markets. And then honestly, even in developed markets, even in the US, right? So that's sort of
Hmm.
what fueled the idea of like, okay, we have to look beyond just Latin America. We have to actually internationalize the company. And that's what the company is doing now. And I think that's what can certainly make it a multi-billion-dollar company because the product market fit is not only in Latin America. Today they've signed one of the biggest payments companies in Africa. They've signed one of the biggest payments companies in India. They signed the biggest neobank in Southeast Asia. And they're beginning to make commercial traction in the US, which is massively exciting. And as you said, they did raise a Series B a bit over a year ago. So the company is very well capitalized. So we're super, super excited about their future.
Okay, last kind of portfolio topic, and it's of recent, is Strike AI. And I was going to ask this, and you mentioned it. It's not technically in this fintech ecosystem directly, but you mentioned you gained great conviction from the founder. But essentially, they're hiring world class hackers to help companies perform audits and efficiency with penetration testing. Right? Share a little bit of how you met the founder and how you decided to lead the round.
Yeah. So Strike fundamentally is building continuous pen testing, right? And in a suite of products that allows that for companies that have a high amount of data, transactionality, and sensitivity, right? So financial enterprise, of course, are probably the number one in that category. We see a massive need for this in Latin America because the amount of cybercrime in the region has increased exponentially, which makes
Yeah.
sense because on the back of the rampant digitalization that has happened, right, through COVID and the creation of PICs, etc., it makes total sense. You need
Hmm.
tools that support that type of growth, and and especially with the advent of AI, like the payments article that was published yesterday on them explains, I think that hackers can just unethical
Hmm.
hackers can get more and more creative, right? So you have to both have ethical hackers that counteract that, and you can, of course, which has been the basis of their solution for now, or you leverage AI and other automation to be able to build more products that can do that as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's the Strike 360 at a very high glance. That's a Strike 360 exactly product, and that's what the company is very focused on doing. And obviously this round is a substantial part of the resources are going to help them accelerate on that. How did I meet Santiago? You asked. I met
Yeah.
him. Fun enough, I met him through Greyhound. It's a fund that I have a very good relationship with out of London. And fun enough, I became closer to Greyhound when they looked at the Series B of Symmetric, where they did not end up investing. But I think it's part of the. It also says something about this industry, right? I think you always have to have humility in accepting certain outcomes and decisions, and you always have to be willing to learn from others. And every fund has a different process, right? So I think
Right.
sometimes investors can get, not offended, right? But they can get bothered when other funds don't see eye to eye with them. Founders can get bothered when investors don't want to invest in their company. But look, I mean, I
Exactly.
think from every interaction you can learn. I think that's the way to look at things. And sometimes you don't work with somebody the first time, you might work with them at another occasion, right?
Yeah. And the two last points I had on Strike is the first is, do you think the timing is now more idealistic or perfect in the sense of maybe 5, 6 years ago, LATAM, cybersecurity without the integration of AI, the use case would be there, but the demand for the market, maybe not. Am I following this correctly? Or has this
Yeah,
been a
yeah.
trend that you've been following?
Oh, for sure. I think the confluence of, again, like, rapid digitalization, plus I think like the backlash of cybercrime on the back of that, and the fact that AI is both making cyber crime more dangerous, but also making cybersecurity more intelligent. Is the confluence of these two things are the big macro tailwinds that I think can make Strike a very big company. Yeah.
Yeah. Last thing on Strike, I saw the round was oversubscribed. How do you think you guys won the round to lead it? I'm sure many people are bidding. What makes you think you stood out and ultimately have the chance to lead the round?
Well, you would have to ask Santi the question. But I think we had the fortune of being able. Santi was spending time in New York. We had several interactions with him, and I think ultimately
Mhm.
we established a personal connection, which sounds cliche, but I
Yeah.
think both. I think we proved to him that we're people that can add value and people that will be
Mhm.
close to the business and will make an effort to help him in whatever way we can.
Mhm.
And I think that is a difficult thing to do, and I think that's something that that we really, really strive to do. And again, I think part of having a concentrated portfolio does just that.
Final thoughts, just like quick, simple kind of questions is as an investor, what's been the biggest lesson working alongside Brooks and Gareth as founding members of the FinTech Collective Fund?
Yeah, I think, look, the biggest lesson is that even if you're an investor, you have to think like an operator. I think that the way they build FinTech Collective is the way, in many ways, the way you build a startup. You have to empower people. You have to equip them for success, but you have to let them run with what they want to do, and you have to respect, right? Like where you have expertise and where someone else can add value and delegate that, right? And I think that's how
Hmm.
I was treated here, which I'm extremely thankful for. And I think that that's what I would hope to do for my team here going forward,
Yeah.
and who knows in the future.
Yeah. How do you think of productivity and time management? I like asking people this because you juggle a lot. You're on a lot of boards, you observe boards, and I'm always struggling with that myself. How do you manage it? What are your frameworks?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, I think that the busier I get, quote unquote, I think the more important it is to really just make time for less people in a way, right? Which sounds contradictory, but I think because at the same time you really have to try to surround yourself with opportunities to have new interactions and have new
Hmm.
experiences, right? But I think the more you realize that you have certain people that you really trust their opinion and their judgment. I think it's very important to stay close to such people because they can inform your decisions in a way that is more powerful than 50 other conversations, right? So as you create sort of like this close knit group of advisors or mentors or however you want to call it, or friends, of course, because they ultimately become friends and ideally are friends. I think that's a good guiding principle. With that said, I struggle with time management all the time, so I'm by no
Yeah,
means an expert.
you're not an expert.
Oh no, man.
In your observation for yourself or other great investors, what's the most underrated skill? Because you've been doing this a while.
To be a good investor,
Yeah, as an investor.
I think creativity. I think, you asked underrated, right? I think you think about an investor, you think about technical ability, you think about frameworks. I think creativity and yeah, and courage, right? I think sometimes you have to get very creative around the structures of how you do deals, around the people that you can bring to companies, and around the advice that you give founders and how you do it. Because it's very exercising persuasion or influence varies massively depending on the company. So if you're not creative, what worked for founder A is not going to work for founder B, even if the advice is right. No, that's the crazy part. Even if the advice is right, if you're not conveying it in a way that makes sense
Yeah.
or that is effective, that sometimes is not as effective, right? Or is not as
Yeah,
powerful.
or
So
patient too,
yeah, so you
getting it
have
to
to
them.
be,
Yeah.
so you got to be very creative.
What are you most proud of today? And then last part of this is what do you wish you spent more time on? Personally, whatever. It could be anything.
What am I most proud of? I think what I'm most proud of is my work at Suyo. I think, I ultimately was able to help the lives of thousands of people and work with fantastic human beings. So of course, through my work at FinTech Collective, I'm able to support founders that can change the lives of many people. But when I was there, I did it directly, right? And ultimately, I aspire for that proximity to impact. That's really what motivates me. And sorry, what was the other question?
What do you wish you spent more
Oh
time
yeah,
on?
reading. I love
Reading.
to read. I love to read. I think I look, the hardest thing to find time for is thesis development in my line of work. I wish there's so many reports and books and things that I want to read every day, and it's just and finding time to do it. Going back to time management is the
Yeah.
hardest thing to do. So I need to get better at it.
That's a wrap on this episode of Cut the Check, presented by VCMX. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and leave a review. It really helps more founders and investors discover the show. You can find me on LinkedIn at MacMeyer or check out my website at macmeyer.com for more insights on startups, venture capital, and the Latin America ecosystem. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next week.